All right. So this is Todd Atkins, and I'm here with Dave Moore from the
What's
one
up, Daddy? How we doing?
from the One Fighting Championship podcast. And today we're going to talk to Dave about, kind of his background, how he got into MMA, and then we're going to run some questions that we have quite a bit here. And before I start, I have a sponsor here, Live to Fight Design. You can find them on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. I have a promo code. You can see my name in red, Todd Atkins. And if you order using that, you can get $20 off of a fighter banner or a gym banner if you want to put it in your gym. They do great work, and you can check them out at Live to Fight Design on Instagram. Now, Dave, before to start out, I kind of wanted to ask like what you're willing to share, kind of what is like your personal background, before you got into MMA.
Oh yeah, for sure. I could talk about that. I'll say even before that, the boys at Live to Fight Design hooked up my beautiful banner here, and I used the Todd Atkins promo to get $20 off. And that's a good thing because I am a broke podcaster, and $20 means a lot to me. In fact, this would be a good time for y'all to like and subscribe to Todd's show, and then go on over to my show and like and subscribe too. Myself, I'm Dave Moore. I am a lifelong MMA fan. I got into UFC originally, the way most old school MMA heads did, and that was through watching The Ultimate Fighter. In my real life, I'd worked in the motorcycle industry for a long time, and most recently, I got my college degree at 38. It's around here somewhere. I know. You can't believe that someone like me is educated, but it is true. And most recently, I've always been a big Japanese MMA fan, like a lot of old school MMA fans. Pride was, probably the most seminal part of my MMA fandom. And that's what I really focus on. I do like North American MMA, but I have a special place in my heart for Asian MMA. And I do have to say, on a separate note, Todd, I found you, I know it probably seems like I just started stalking you on Facebook and blowing up all of your inboxes and stuff, but I actually watched or listened to that interview with Daniel Herbertson, speaking of Pride. Where he talked about his relationship with Miro Milatovic and the demise of Pride. And I just have to tell you, from my standpoint, I think it's just really an honor and a privilege, and really just so amazing that all your fans are going to be able to listen to the two of us, the two best MMA journalists in the game right now. So I just wanted to say that.
Maybe I could hook you up with Dan. That was kind of a interesting interview. Dan had been in Japan, not just doing that. He went to the tsunami sites with Ensign Hanoi. They had some amazing footage. It was on Vice TV. I'll send you the video of it. They went not long after the tsunamis hit, so it was all destroyed and stuff. And they were walking around. They were one of the few people that you know didn't live in those areas that was allowed to walk around because the ensign could kind of do that. And I think Dan, that interview had a lot to do with the demise of Pride, actually. Kind of what resulted. Not necessarily the interview, because that stuff had already happened. So Miro had already gone to the police about that kind of stuff, but it did shed light on it. And I don't know if you remember watching the interview. He literally flew out of Japan the day it aired.
Right.
He
Yeah.
said it
And
was a coincidence. I don't know if he was
I don't
messing with
believe
me
that
or
for a
not.
minute. And when you start talking about these things, Enson Hanoi, what an important factor he was in MMA,
Mhm.
and Pride, and how it ended. And you talk to people who got into MMA in the last 2 years, they don't even know what Pride is. Maybe they've heard about this thing in Japan where like 400-pound Brazilian guys fight 120-pound Japanese guys or something like that. But I would really encourage, if I don't know if this seems like a hardcore MMA show, but if you're a new MMA fan, definitely try to look into some of that stuff, because there's a whole world of MMA that happened before the UFC got on ESPN. And I told you before we got started, I'm planning on writing a book about that, about the rise and demise of Pride. But it's a fascinating story, and there's a lot of great stories like that, and a lot of great characters who weren't, it's not limited to just Yakuza and shady businessmen. There's a lot of people like Enson Hanoi who were really good people and who made a positive impact on the sport and on the country as well.
I think Ensign's a guy you should talk to about your book, because Ensign, he had a lot of connections in the underworld. So yeah, he knows a lot about some of the,
Yeah.
the backers of Pride, some of the politics that went on there. And yeah, he definitely talked to you about it. He's always open to talk about that stuff, unlike a lot of people in Japan.
Right.
But
Yeah. Oh man, that'd be so cool. Hey, before we get started too far into this, I got to tell you, I'm getting a little thirsty here talking with you. And I do a little thing on my show. I hope it's okay, but usually I have a cider each episode. And for my regular listeners tuning in, they'll say a cider. Usually several ciders, but I have a cider of the episode. So just letting you know, I'm sorry I didn't have your home address. I would have shipped you some, but this is going to be a woodchuck. It's a Bellini. It's from their brunch pack, so it's all like brunch cider. So sorry I didn't send you a drink to have with me. I'll make sure next time. And of course, as I always remind my viewers, I'm not sponsored by any cider company. If I was sponsored, my studio would look a lot cooler. So let's give this a try. It's peach cocktail inspired. Sounds right up my alley.
I want to ask you
Liquid candy. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Todd.
my exposure to Japan MMA. When I lived in Hawaii, um, TJ Thompson, who was involved with Super Brawl, he was bringing a lot of the Shuto fighters to his event, and there was a kind of like a VHS store across the street from the arena where he had his events, but it was Japanese owned. So most of the VHS tapes they had were of Japan events. So I think me and a lot of the guys who lived on Oahu, our exposure was to Japan MMA as much as UFC. So I think that's why I got into it. I want to ask why you got into it.
Well, like most people, when they're 19, 20 years old, I worked a terrible job and I was poor. So actually, these things are still around. Best Buy is still around. I would work overnight shifts for the security company where I had to go to construction sites, and I'd go into Best Buy, and Best Buy had all these Pride videos. And I'll be honest with you, I thought Pride FC when I saw it, like back in the day we used to scroll through the channel guide, I thought Pride FC was like a gay thing, like gay fighters or something like that. And I didn't know what it was. And then finally I saw in the Best Buy store, because when I'd work overnight I had a portable DVD player. And for the younger listeners here, you'll have to look up what a DVD player is on Google. But I would buy DVDs of Pride fights, and that's what got me into it. And it's I try to compare it to for people like this. Imagine you're a hardcore NFL fan and you watch the NFL every weekend, and you don't, and at the same time that the NFL is going on, there's a league in Japan that has as good, or let's be honest, for a couple of years, they're better players than are in the NFL. And not only that, there's a backlog of like 10 years of fights that you never knew existed, and they're readily available. That's what it was like for me the first time I popped in a Pride DVD. It blew my mind. And I found that I was like, I got to the point pretty quickly where I realized, hey, not only are these fighters seem to be of a higher caliber, the shows are of a higher caliber, and the way they do things, the rule set more than anything, allows this to be of a higher caliber. So that's what really got me into it. And I got to tell you, Todd, I do feel like right now we're on the verge of something like that with some of these Asian organizations. I feel like we're on the verge of fans going, "Hey, this thing in North America, it's great. I could watch it on ESPN. It's really cool." But there's something out there that their finish rate is twice as much, and it's the shows are just as frequent as the UFC, and they have world class fighters. I think we're really on the precipice of that. I'd like to hear your thoughts if you think maybe I'm just a fanboy and I think we're closer to that than we actually are.
No, I think you're right about ONE FC. I do think because Chatri, has a long martial arts background, I think he thinks in the same way that Sakaki Bara and you know some of the other guys that were involved, Mimose and I'm trying to remember the guy's name, the one who was committed suicide.
Oh,
Um,
committed suicide. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That was the most convenient
yeah,
suicide committal for the Yakuza in world history.
yeah. I'm trying to remember his last name, but anyway, in Japan, because of the culture, I think that Chatri kind of has a similar thing, being from Thailand, the culture. And I agree with you. He's trying to bring in the UFC was kind of like this, I think, when Zuffa first bought the UFC because there weren't a lot of fighters. They were trying to get people who had some sort of accolade in at least one martial art, but now they'll take anybody. I mean, a lot of the guys that they pick up have less than 10 fights. Most of them aren't necessarily particular decorated in any art whatsoever. And they'll just take whoever they can get. And it's a lot different. And I think ONE FC, you're right, is operating on it where they will take somebody if they have a decorated background somewhere. If they don't, we're probably not going to take them. And they have access to fighters that the UFC I don't think has access to because their markets in America and they don't want to have to get fighters out of Thailand or out of this place or that place. UFC has a lot of ONE has a lot of access to fighters who come from a martial arts culture in their countries.
Right.
And the
And
UFC has some of that with Dagestan and
sure.
Kazakhstan, but I think ONE FC they have this big pool, and they got people that live there and know the area, and yeah, they have a lot of great fighters, really, really great fighters.
And what I'd say about that is that, I give North American MMA and the UFC in particular a lot of grace in the past when it comes to things like fighter pay and fighter treatment because and I'll preface that. I'll expound on that. Dana White, his background, besides being doing cardio kickboxing classes, as Miguel is so happy to point out, was he was doing some little management of boxers and kind of in that world a little bit, and he saw what kind of impact the corruption of the boxing world can have on a sport. And so if I could get into his brain, I got to believe that a lot of the decisions he makes has to do with that, controlling that so that doesn't happen. As much as people talk about the fighters should be making 50% of Endeavor's income, and maybe that's true, you see what happens in boxing. These guys make all the money in the world, but it's just the two big guys who are on the top of the pay-per-view, and nobody cares about any of the other fights, and the fights that are supposed to happen don't happen. I could count on one hand like really great big time fights in North American MMA that didn't actually happen. And I think that's some of the motivation, besides obviously greed and making money. So I give a lot of grace in that, but we are quickly approaching a place where you have an event like Saturday night, Holly Holm versus Mira Bueno Silva, where they're the only ranked fighters on the card.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I know you remember a time maybe less than 10 years ago where every fighter, top to bottom, including the prelim, was an important and interesting fighter. And we're just moving far away from that. And I think in what Chatri is doing in ONE is the opposite idea. How can we expand our product to create more interest, to create more excitement? How can we change the rule set so we don't have so many finishes? I don't know about all of your listeners, and you can't pull my listeners. They're all like ex-cons. They just got out of prison. They're on government aid, so don't worry about them. But for me, when a fight like the fight for UFC in Vegas or the PFL the other weekend has like 6 or 7 decisions in a row, I'm ready to turn off the TV.
Yeah, I mean, really, when you mention prelims, late SEG, early Zuffa, I don't know how many years. I don't even know when they started prelims because it used to be the pay-per-view was the card.
Right.
There were no prelims. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like they've flooded the market every Saturday, UFC, and they don't have the talent to keep up with it. And like you're talking, that's what happens when you have a card like Saturday where you don't even know who most of the fighters are.
Well, and that's what I wonder. Why is that? Because this company, we just heard it's worth more than the WWE, and I'm not picking on the UFC because PFL, Bellator, all these other organizations in North America, their product is the same. It's, 1 or 2 interesting fights and the rest, is a lot of, grapple heavy decisions, and you're telling me there's over 7 billion people in this world. And we can't find enough female fighters to fill up the UFC 145 division. Like, who's not doing their job here? And not to say that ONE is perfect in this regard, but I will tell you that I'll say this because I didn't know until, after it already started. ONE FC puts on a weekly show. They put on more shows than the UFC. They do a show in Lumpini Stadium where they do mostly Muay Thai in the 4-ounce gloves, three-minute rounds, but they also have MMA and other fights. Their heavyweight champion and light heavyweight champion Anatoly Malikin recently defended his title. So it's not a direct comparison to Dana White's Contender Series, but it's kind of a similar idea. You're trying to fight your way into ONE FC. So you could watch this show every week, in addition to their big fights they have at least once a month on Prime. So there's a lot out there. They're putting out a lot of content, but it's rare that not impossible, but it's rare that I watch one of those Friday shows where I'm just fast forwarding because I've watched enough MMA to know this guy is going to lay on the other guy for 15 minutes until the bell rings. I've seen this hundreds of times before. So I think that's the difference there between the two. And the other thing I'll say is this. I know that Chatri is well funded. He's apparently because Singapore is like a tax haven, he essentially has unlimited money. But it's not like they're just trying to get the biggest unsigned guy from the UFC to fight the biggest unsigned guy from Ryzen or something like that. They're doing the same thing that any good MMA organization should do. They're growing fighters from the local stage to the biggest stage or one of the biggest stages in the world.
Yeah, and the other thing I didn't really get to, but I was kind of talking about it. America's not a martial arts culture. People train martial arts here, or whatever, recreational, karate, taekwondo. These are from other countries. Where one is, they're surrounded by martial arts culture countries. So they're picking from martial arts culture people background. These people, a lot of them have a high level of skill, and the UFC isn't giving us that anymore. Not to say that the fighters are bad. I'm not saying that. They have a lot of good fighters, but I think because they're having to supply so many events for ESPN and and their own business model, it's just, and who they're picking from, especially Dana White's Contender Series, you're not going to get a lot of guys who are going to fly themselves from this place and that place to get on that show, and that's primarily where they get a lot of their fighters now. And
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, bud.
Yeah.
Let me pronounce a few words for you that any MMA fan who wants to know about future MMA fighters should know. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Don't get those two together confused. You'll look like a moron. Azerbaijan. This is where the next crop of fighters. This is the new generation of Dagestan. The way we were like, I didn't even know what a Dagestan was, and now there's all these wrestler guys coming out of there. That's how my fans sound because they're morons. I know your fans are educated, but mine are. They lack decision making skills. Either way, it's not your problem. These countries like Uzbekistan, 2 years ago, there was no Uzbeki fighters in the UFC, and now there's like 5 or 6 of them. And don't get me started on one, because any representation they have from these Eastern Bloc, Central Asian countries in the UFC, one has way more of them because it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a geographical thing, and that's where you find your next big star. That's where you find your next big fighter. And I know in North American MMA, they need the North American star, but look at Khabib. Khabib is probably the most famous Muslim athlete in the world, and nobody could even pronounce his name 5 years ago. So that's the importance of these guys. Just because they're not a Penn State wrestling champion doesn't mean they don't have the ability to generate millions for MMA organization and garner interest and grow an organization in North America.
Right. And like I said, I also think, one has the luxury of, we don't have to get American fighters. If we do, we're going to be very selective about who they are. They have to be guys that are highly qualified. The rest of the people we'll get from the surrounding countries. We'll only get the best guys that are available.
And
We
I
don't
think
need to get a bunch of average guys.
right, right. And I think to a certain degree, that's where the benefit of having guys who are like, maybe former UFC, former Bellator stars, I think there is a place for that, especially when you talk about North American fighters. Obviously, the biggest star is for North American fans, and one is Demetrius Johnson. But I think you're going to see in the next couple of years that there'll be a couple of those guys, some that are already in one, some that go to one that will end up being big stars in one and continue their stardom there. The other thing about this is fighters aside, it's good to have stars, and there's guys over there in one that have serious star power. Their
Mhm.
heavyweight champion Anatoly Malkin is a very likable guy. Um, and he finishes fights. There's a lot of guys like that, world class dudes who have statues of them in their home country that North American fans have never heard of, and that's important to have star quality. And I think one could do a lot better job of that, of focusing that star power towards North America. But I think just numbers wise, if you're a person who likes to see exciting fights, you could turn your brain off and watch ONE FC the same way I was when I watched my first ONE FC. I didn't know any of these guys, and I was entertained. You don't have to know their names or say I'm rooting for this guy or that guy to be entertained. And it's all in the numbers. Like I'll give you an example. Just because I knew I was coming on here, I thought something like this would come up. I crunched the numbers. Now, again, my fans, they're not going to understand this because they're not good with numbers, but your fans will appreciate this. I know they're hardcore. All right. So UFC on Vegas 77, which was the fight from this Saturday, we saw 8 of 12 fights go to a decision, with one fight being stopped due to freak injury. So, with the exception of that, there's one fight stopped due to injury, but otherwise, 8 of the 12 fights went to a decision. So, with the exception of the injury stoppage, the first 6 fights in a row. So, 15-minute round. That's an hour and a half of fighting without commercials or breaks that all went to decision. Now, there was one or two of there that had some interesting moments, but a decision is, ideally not what, if you ask the average MMA fan what they're looking for. Overall, the card only had one first round finish. Now we'll contrast that with one championship on Prime, Fight Night 12, which was also this Saturday. It's on Prime if anybody's interested in watching it who's never watched a one event. If you have Amazon Prime, you have one. That event saw 7 finishes and 9 fights. So to put that into like a percentage thing, one had a 77% finish rate, which is like unheard of, in North American MMA, contrasting with the UFC's event, which had just a 30% finish rate. And for anybody thinking I'm picking on the UFC, I love the UFC. I love watching MMA. I appreciate Dana White and the Fertittas bringing MMA to North America, but the MMA that I watched 10 years ago was a lot better than it is now. And that's all I'm saying. And, if you watch the one fight on that they do on YouTube, this weekly show I was talking about, you might not be tuning in to be like, I want to see what Khabilan Javelin is going to do tonight. But I will tell you this, even if you don't know who Khabilan Javelin is, you'll want to see his defeat of Sulaiman because it was an amazing fight. And that's all I'm saying about this. If you like excitement, which is why I turned into MMA, you would like this product.
Yeah, I think the big thing of the knees to the head on the ground, and the UFC did away with that many, many years ago in the unified rules of that's a big weapon that allows for finishes. Not just that, but the guy having to move to avoid those, it presents a lot of opportunity. And when they did away with that, yeah.
Yeah, if someone's a North American MMA fan and they've only watched North American MMA, which again, I'll reiterate, I love North American MMA. I love the UFC. I even enjoy watching some of the other shows as well. But if you've only watched that, the first time you see somebody on the ground get finished by knees to the head, it's not a thing about like, oh, that was so violent, it was so cool. It made me, the first time I saw that in Pride, it made me realize like, oh, there's a whole side of fighting that we don't get to experience because we've taken away every weapon on the ground.
Mhm.
And if anybody's in denial about that, I would say think critically about the rules that are not allowed in MMA and what do the majority of them favor. Let's see what we have. We have knees to the head of a downed opponent, soccer kicks to a grounded opponent, stomps to a grounded opponent. Now, keep in mind, it's too much violence to kick somebody in the head when they're on the ground, but it's perfectly acceptable for someone who's on the ground to head kick an opponent, or for Edson to spinning heel kick Terry Edom to the jaw and give him permanent CTE, you know? And I'll even add this one in, 10 to 12 elbows. You know, everybody's heard that story from Joe Rogan about how 10 to 12 elbows were because one of the commission guys was watching ESPN late at night and saw one of those karate competitions of him breaking wood. That's not what it's about. If you think that's what it's about, you need to read your MMA history. What that's about is the guys who started the UFC way back in the day was Rorion Gracie, one of the Gracies. And the guy who wrote the laws, literally the laws, or had a big input on it, Big John McCarthy, was one of his students. And they were creating a rule set that favored jiu-jitsu competitors, that favored Gracie jiu-jitsu. UFC is not a novel idea. People talk about that as the birth of MMA. The Gracies have been doing this thing in Brazil for years, where they would challenge other martial arts styles. They would put on events where they wrestled, capoeira guys or karate guys. And of course, if you don't allow certain strikes on the ground, a jiu-jitsu guy's always going to win when nobody knows how to defend it, you know? But the problem is now that we've eliminated all these weapons on the ground, and Gracie jiu-jitsu doesn't work anymore. You know, we just saw a Gracie fight in the UFC against a Canadian kickboxer, and he wasn't able to implement his game. Guys are too good now to get caught. When was the last time you saw somebody get caught in an armbar? You know, it's not like it was 10 years ago. And that's what I'm saying, is that because of this has created stagnation in the sport. And it's not just the UFC, it's all North American MMA. There's a striking exchange. Someone doesn't want to get struck, so they get pushed up against the cage. That person gets taken down, and the person on the bottom tries to submit them. They can't submit because there's too much good defense, and there's not enough ways to create offense, you know? And I know I'm ranting a little bit here, but I think this is important to my point about one, is that, you know, if you watch enough MMA, if you're like me and you watch both of one shows this weekend, that's 8 hours of MMA. You watch UFC's show, that's 12 hours right there. You see a difference. You do that every weekend, you see a difference. And you see that the finishes are much more satisfying. The sport is a lot better when guys have a way to advance their position on the ground. And there's just no way to do that in North American MMA. And the UFC has done a really good job of making us believe that there's nothing they could do about it. You know, they have the former head of the Nevada State Athletic Commission in their pocket. He's on their board. They could change the rules if they wanted to, but why would they? ESPN is paying them, checks are clearing, they're selling out however many stadiums in a row. And believe me, I'm a moron. Don't listen to me for financial advice. The UFC and a lot of these other organizations in North America are doing great. But I'm speaking as a fan and someone who says, hey, maybe there's an opportunity in the future for another organization that's well-funded, has exciting fighters, offers a different product, to come into the North American market and say, hey, we offer something different, the same way Pride did 10 years ago.
Problem with that is, you know, I don't know, I can't verify this, but I've heard from people that I believe that, UFC had some things to say to the commission in Colorado or Denver. You know, we won't bring our event here since you guys sanctioned this event, this ONE FC event. We're not going to come to Colorado anymore unless you do away with this. These rules that you allowed to have happen.
That's straight from Chatri's mouth. You know, when they did their show in Denver, they hired a bunch of influencers and people in the MMA sphere to kind of promote it on their podcast and stuff. And Brendan Schaub was the biggest one out of those guys, like the biggest advocate for him, which I like Schaub. I don't understand the hate about it. I enjoy his show. I think he's funny and all that stuff, but that's neither here nor there. Probably because we're both morons. It's like two beta fish, you know. But Chatri gave that to him directly, said, hey, yeah, the Denver commission had informed them that some people from the UFC had reached out and said they were going to stop doing shows in Colorado until they agreed to. It's not even about one. It wasn't. They didn't say one. What they said was under the universal rules. That's what the UFC is worried about. They're not. They are worried about one, but that's not all they're worried about. What they're really worried about is the universal rule set. They're worried about someone in North America going, hey, you know, I'm based in Denver. I want to start an MMA promotion. I'm going to do it under the universal rule set. And that thing gets bigger and people go, hey, this is way more entertaining. They have a 70% finish rate versus a 30% finish rate. That's really what they're worried about. The UFC knows that you can't offer a different product because of the commission, aka the worst thing to ever happen to North American MMA.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion for sure. And like I said, I think one's done an amazing job with people like Stamp and Rod Tang, and just some of the fighters they've had. Even the Lees were getting pretty popular before everything happened with Victoria, and Angela was, had a big fan base. And they've done a great job with that stuff.
I would agree with that, but there is some differences. Like, for example, I don't know if you've this piece of news has come across your desk, but Chatri just made a public statement about how Stamp Fairtex will be making 10 million baht for her next fight, which will make her the highest paid athlete in history. She's fighting Hamsi Sohi for the vacant the belt that Victoria Lee. Or Angela Lee, rather, my apologies. Angela Lee vacated because she's apparently retiring. And that's great. It sounds great on paper, like 10 million baht. I'm sure my fans are like, wow, that's a lot of money, 10 million baht. 10 million baht is like 300 grand. That's like some UFC fighters guarantee. Even in Bellator and PFL, they're making more than that. So that shows you, they're not in some regards, like marketing, PR, they're not at the level that North American MMA organizations are. But I love what they're doing, and I think most North American fans, if they could, they would get behind a product like that. And speaking of the Lees, that Christian Lee, who is probably one of the best fighters in his weight class, is not in the UFC. He's returning to training, so there is hope that at least we'll see one of the Lees. But yeah, we're not going to get that family dynasty that people predicted 2 years ago. Of these three fighters with their manager, coach, dad, just taking over the sport and holding every belt they could get their hands on. Doesn't seem like that's going to happen due to the tragedy of what happened with their younger sister. And I just want to take this moment, to just bring something up, and that's that one of the referees, and a referee that I respect a lot, Palm from Thailand. If anybody's familiar with him, it's probably because he dives in and catches fighters when they're knocked out. And he was a young guy, and he also committed suicide a couple weeks ago. And so I just want to call out, that that's a very unfortunate thing. It's very sad. I myself have been depressed a lot. So, they always say at this time, like, reach out to your friends if you think they're depressed. But also, if you're depressed, like, I know it's hard to speak up when you're feeling depressed, but like, try to reach out to somebody, because that's a victory in and of itself. So I just want to, I know I joke around and say a lot of dumb shit, but I wanted to take this opportunity on your platform to just put that out there. I hope that's okay.
No, it's quite all right. And I was actually trying to verify your 10 million baht thing. I'll see if I get an answer on that. I reached out to somebody who would know. But it is an interesting thing that, like I told you, even if she got 300K, half of that's going to go to Fairtex. In return for, room and board, training, food. She doesn't have to pay for any of that. But half of that does go to Fairtex. And I don't know if she has management who that would, so it won't all be hers, but yeah.
Yeah. And when we talk about North American MMA, keep that in mind, that nobody, no agent, no promotion, no nothing is taking half of a fighter's pay. So
no agent is room and boarding fighters and giving them food and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I know ATT has some of that, but I don't know if they give them food, free training. all of that
Yeah, but it's
included.
Thailand. Isn't like a
Yeah.
rooftop penthouse condominium like $1,500 a month? I mean, I don't know. You know more about that
Yeah.
stuff than I do.
I don't. I haven't I went to Thailand when I was really young. My family went, but I've never been there as an adult, so I wouldn't know.
Always wanted to
I
go.
know
I'll
it's
put,
cheap to be there.
yeah,
Yeah, I know
yeah.
that.
I'll put it on the list. I've always wanted to go. I want to go check out the Lady Boys. I'm a big fan. All right. Hey, are you tired of talking about Brock, or do you want to talk about Brock?
No, no, let's talk about the first thing because, you know, I want to hear your thoughts on Fury Ngannou. Obviously, that's the big story right now. It got signed. Some people, obviously, there was a narrative that it wasn't going to happen. The UFC was putting that out. Now that it's happened, I want to hear your thoughts. I kind of asked Miguel about this. Did he feel that, you know, Francis has won versus the UFC now? What do you think?
Well, I think this is a pretty heavy subject, so better get prepared. Um, I'll say this, and this is probably a good opportunity to kind of say my piece about a problem that me and you face a lot. You more so, you have a much bigger platform than me, but um, you know, I've kind of beat this drum for a long time that Francis has enough star power to go off and do his own thing. I know he's not Conor McGregor, but he's exactly what a promotion could want. He's big, he's intimidating looking, he's got a mystique to him, and he knocks people out in the first round. What organization would not want to utilize a guy like that? He's consistent, he fights regularly. So when he left the UFC, I said to myself, I'm disappointed that the John Jones fight isn't happening, as I'm sure a lot of the MMA heads were. But I also said everything he wants to do is very easily attainable. And I'll be real. I really thought we were going to see John Jones go fight a Deontay Wilder, one of those guys, maybe even a Francis Ngannou, and then be back in the UFC a year later to fight John. I was happy for it. You know, I don't really care too much about MMA crossover boxing matches. It's not really my cup of tea, but I might even watch this one because you never know with Francis. Now, do I think he's going to knock out Fury? No, but that had my attention. But then after time went on, and you had people who just said blatantly, like, he's not going to get a good deal outside of the UFC and he's not going to fight a boxer. And I just don't understand what that's based on, because we've seen an MMA fighter, the biggest MMA fighter we have in North America, fight the biggest boxer they have in North America. So why do people think this is impossible? And when I analyze this stuff, the kind of thing I always think about is like, put yourself in a pro boxer's shoes. You're sitting around at home watching TV, eating pretzels, and you have the opportunity to fight a guy who you are not going to lose to. You are not going to lose to, you know? If you want to hear why a boxer won't lose to an MMA fighter, go listen to the previous episode of the Todd Atkins show and listen to Miguel Ederrade's comparison of ballet dancers to hip hop break dancers. You're not going to lose, and you're going to make millions of dollars, and you probably don't even have to train extra hard for it. Why would you not do that? Do you hate money? Do you not want to get your name on the front of the news feed? Do you not want to do a bunch of pay-per-view and get flown out first class to Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi or wherever? Why would you not do that? If you're an MMA fighter who's got a big enough name, why would you not do that? Why would you not make multiple times what you can make in an entire contract doing that? So that was the first thing to me. Why would they not do this? For anybody who says these decisions are about principle or about the respect of the sport or anything, they're morons. I don't know what to tell you. You're a moron if you think that someone wouldn't fight Francis Ngannou for $30 million for an easy payday. You're a moron if you think they wouldn't do that. Now, it's the same thing with the MMA deal. The reason people had a hard time with the MMA deal is because they think too small. And what you have to remember is that there's a lot of people that are a lot smarter than us who run companies like the PFL, Bellator, ONE FC, Ryzen, and of course the UFC. And these people have marketing minds and they have marketing budgets. So when I heard he was signed by the PFL, I was like, oh, that's genius. It's not what I wanted. I wanted to see him fight John Jones, the two best heavyweights in the world, in my opinion. But the PFL deal, this is genius. And the reason I never lost faith in any of this is because things are falling into line exactly as Francis would want them. And what's funny to me is this guy he's got like a fourth grade education and he outsmarted everyone. And I'll go into depth on that, on the PFL deal. You know, I think that's pretty clear on the boxing side. Did I explain that well enough that it's really simple? It's called money. People would want that and it'd be easy and neither guy loses when Francis Ngannou loses. Like, was that pretty clear?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll keep going. The PFL deal, here's why it's attractive. PFL as a brand doesn't do anything that excites MMA fans. I am a hardcore MMA fan, and I might have watched 4 entire PFL cards, maybe. I love MMA. I watched 12 hours of MMA this weekend, and that's part of the problem too. So if you're PFL and you just got whatever it is, $120 million from Qatar, what are you going to do with that money? Well, you could try to sign some better guys from, you know, UFC or ONE or Bellator or something, or you could buy Bellator, you know, don't worry. I'll get into that. Don't worry. I'll get into that. That would be your best move. That's coming. Don't worry. But really, that's not going to make a dent. I mean, look they did that. They used some of that money to get, you know, some like top 10 guys, you know, they got Santos, and then he lost in the first round, you know, their pick, the one who snuck his way into the Shane Burgos, the guy who he didn't, but the organization snuck him into the tournament. You do something like that, you get those guys. Those aren't the names. It's not like they signed Israel Adesanya, Yuri Prohaska, and John Jones. That would be a big deal. Getting guys who were like mid-tier guys, they weren't even headlining cards. That's never going to turn around the PFL. You know, part of the problem is that they're offering the same crummy product that all North American MMA is, based on the things I just outlined, but with lesser known names. So you're never going to turn that over. So if you're an executive at the PFL and you've invested hundreds of $millions up to this point, you've got a TV deal on ESPN, you've got a whole, you've figured everything out, how you're going to do it, you got your tournament set up, you got your executive board, and things aren't looking up. You're growing, but not at the rate that the investors want you to grow at. What can you do? Well, you could look at a fight or a fight card or a pay-per-view, the best way that these organizations make money historically, not as a return on investment, but as investment in marketing in the future of the company. So what does that have to do with Francis Ngannou? Well, if you look at the structure of the PFL, here's how they have it set up. They do a tournament. The winner of the tournament gets $1 million. That's a big incentive. That's probably how they've landed some of those fish that they have. But now this time, instead of the incentive just being $1 million, it's $1 million to win, and then another $2 million to fight Francis Ngannou. So you have a $3 million incentive, because that was worked into Francis's contract that his opponent will get $2 million. So by winning this tournament, you have the chance to make more money than everybody except maybe the top. I mean, you tell me, $3 million. What percentage of UFC fighters in the history of the UFC have made that much in their career? I would say 2%. What do you think?
I'd say there's a lot. I don't know how many have even fought for that much at once. You know,
I'm saying over their
some.
entire career that you could make in
Right.
one night.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying there's not a lot of fighters that fought for more than 1 million on
Absolutely.
a fight, one fight. There's some, I'm sure, but Not a lot. The amount is small in comparison to how many fighters have fought in the UFC. Very small.
There's like 700 fighters in the UFC right now. Maybe like 12 or 15 of them have fought for over $1 million. So that's a big incentive. If you're the number 4 ranked heavyweight in the UFC, that's appealing to you. If you're someone who's over in one and maybe you're like one fight away from fighting for the title, or you're in Bellator and you're the Bellator heavyweight champion, which I'll get into that, but it's not going to matter. That's a big incentive for you. And one of the things I heard these journalists, and I use that word very generously, harping on is the timeline. Oh, this is taking so long. Then he's going to box. That's even now, even after all these guys who were dead wrong said it's never going to happen. The boxing fight's never going to happen. The only guy in the media who ever didn't go negative on Francis, he was the guy who was essentially his publicist, the guy who was getting the inside track the whole time. So you can't really credit that guy. You know, he knew Francis was telling him play by play what was happening. But so many guys, even now, they were like, this is never going to happen. He's not going to get the boxing match. The PFL deal is terrible. Even a week ago when they were saying it was going to be an exhibition, people would be like, exhibition. All those people said it was a bad idea. They always harped on the length of it. So here's why the length is a good thing. The length in between the fights. So Francis is going to fight Tyson Fury at the end of the year. And then the following year, he's going to fight in the PFL. And I'll get to what that fight's going to be. But he's going to fight in the PFL. And then the following year after that, he's going to fight the winner of a heavyweight tournament. And the winner of that heavyweight tournament, essentially, as I was saying, wins $3 million. So let me ask you a question. If you were Cyril Gane and you had 3 fights left on your contract, and you know you could possibly fight Francis Ngannou in the PFL for essentially $3 million, would you renew your contract with the UFC, or would you try to fight it out so you could go and fight in this heavyweight tournament?
Or use it as leverage to try and get more money from the UFC. Yeah.
A rising tide raises. I'm glad you brought up that point, because that is already what's happening. A rising tide raises all ships. Am I drawing this out too much? Let me know. I could wrap it up.
No.
All right, cool. I'll keep going. So if you're that guy in the UFC, that gives you incentive. Now, if you're in another organization, let's say you're the number 2 heavyweight and 1, it's the same thing. It applies all around. But we don't have to worry about filling that tournament up, because there's already a bunch of heavyweight fighters in PFL, and there's already a bunch of heavyweight fighters in Bellator. Well, what does that have to do with one? Well, anybody who follows your reporting knows you were the first person to report the PFL Bellator deal, which is happening. It's going to close before the end of the year. That's not coming from Todd. I'm just saying, I know these things. That's happening. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but you were the first person to break that story, and I feel that that's coming before the end of the year.
It better, because I feel like, and you may have heard me and Miguel talking about this in the most recent episode, he was saying, look, and I had said this in brief, you hit one home run, you need to hit another. You know, that's always how it is in news or, you know, as a promotion. Okay, you gave us Francis. What's the next thing? You got momentum here. You can't stop here. You need to hit another one over the fence, or the momentum's not going to be good enough. You know, you got to show people that you're going to do more, and that Bellator thing is more.
And that's exactly what this is. This is marketing. This isn't about the return from a pay-per-view. This is about marketing. This is about, I'm talking about the PFL because of Francis getting signed. I'm talking about the PFL because they're involved when he's doing his fight in Saudi Arabia. Now there's this heavyweight tournament and the winner's going to fight Francis. Now Francis is doing a pay-per-view with a certain heavyweight fighter. I'll get to that. And now the winner of the tournament that we all watched, because it has all these great fighters in it. It's the best heavyweight tournament since the Showtime heavyweight tournament on Strikeforce. Sorry, the Strikeforce heavyweight tournament. People are going to be tuning in by that point. By that point, they're tuned into the PFL. So the PFL is going to buy Bellator. You know, you reported that it is going to happen. You know, anybody who reported it after you is just a thief. So I'll get to that. Don't worry. But you've got a bunch of heavyweights in Bellator. Who do we got over there? We've got Nemkov. He could fight in this thing. You know, we've got the champion. Sorry, too much drugs in high school. Who's the heavyweight champion? The guy from the UFC, the wrestler.
Oh, Bader.
Bader. So there's two people in your tournament. You get one or two top 10 fighters from the UFC, heavyweights from the UFC, even light heavyweights. You know, you get someone like an Anthony Smith or someone who wants to go up and go over there and do that. You know, then you got all the guys who are already in the PFL, and suddenly you have a very, very, very compelling heavyweight tournament. And it's like, I don't want to tune in for the PFL middleweight tournament because I don't know who any of these guys are. But I do want to tune in for a heavyweight tournament where it's all big name stars. And that's what I mean when I say this is marketing. And there's several steps to this. Now, the one step that I left out is who is that big fight that Francis is going to have before the heavyweight tournament takes place. The thing that really gets people excited. You know, they do this big fight, and during the big fight, they announce all the entrants into the tournament. And anybody who follows me, they know what I'm going to say. It's Brock Lesnar. Even now, it's Brock Lesnar. And it's the same reason that Francis Ngannou is fighting Tyson Fury, because it's free money. You're Brock Lesnar. You're like 80 years old or whatever he is. You've been wrestling in the WWE for 5 years. Anybody who knows anything about the WWE, I don't know much about it, but I know they do 5-year contracts. They're the same for Brock Lesnar as the guy who's jerking the curtain. And you have the ability to leave your WWE contract, do a fight that doesn't matter because you're not a professional fighter, and make more money possibly than you made fighting in the UFC against Mark Hunt or anybody else, for a one-off deal that you could turn around and do whatever you want with your life. You could retire, you could go back to the WWE, anything you want. Why would you not do that? Why would you not make that money? Why would the PFL not make that investment? Tell me what other fighter is out there. Like, if there's someone I forgot, I mean, Todd, you're a smarter guy than I am. If there's someone I forgot who would be a better matchup, someone that could actually convince me to say, I will pay $50 to watch Francis Ngannou fight X, and it can't be anybody who's in the UFC. Do you have anyone?
Maybe Gable Stevenson, if they could get him to come to the PFL.
Todd, I love that idea. You know I do, and I know you love that idea, but
they'd have to build him up first. They don't have the time. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and most of the people, like, I know your fans know who that is, but most people who watch the UFC, they don't even know who Shogun who is. They're going to be like, "Who's that?" It's Francis. It would guarantee over 1 million buys. Nobody else could do that. That is worth, in marketing alone, even if they did it for free and paid Francis Ngannou $10 million, it'd be worth it. I guarantee you, an organization like PFL pays way more than $10 million a year on marketing. It is worth it 100%. And that leads into the tournament, the greatest heavyweight tournament we've seen since Strikeforce heavyweight tournament. And then the winner of that is going to do another pay-per-view and fight Francis Ngannou. It's marketing. It's marketing. And that's what I think about Francis. You asked me a question and I talked for 20 minutes, but that is what is going to happen. And that is their plan. You know, I don't know anybody inside PFL that inside PFL. I know some people on the periphery, but that is what they're going to do. It's the only play. It's the only reason signing Francis Ngannou to this big contract where there's all these guarantees. They do tournaments. Why would they not do this? They've already got the promotion of the Tyson Fury fight. They've got their own promotion wing because they signed Jake Paul. He's got one of the most successful promotional arms in all of combat sports right now. Why would they not do this? It's going to print money. It's going to print publicity.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. It all makes sense. Let me ask you about Ronda Rousey, because I know you were kind of behind. You were the first person I heard mention that she was going to come back, and of course, other people started. Really, it took them a while to fall in
Yeah.
behind you. I think
It
it
was
took
like
them.
3 weeks, which is like
Yeah,
14
they didn't
years
fall in
in internet
immediately.
time.
They
Yeah.
fell in
Yeah.
after, and of course, they didn't mention you. But
Well, that's what I was going to say. That speaks to, you have much more reach than I do. My info trickles out and then the little rats go and grab it up. And that's just a perfect segue into saying, there there should be an appreciation for what something like Todd does, and I guess to a lesser extent, you should appreciate what I do, I
mhm.
guess. Here's the thing, you know, if your only news source for MMA is people who formerly or currently worked for the UFC in the form of MMA fighters or worked for Bellator in the form of MMA fighters, you're going to get a slant. You're not going to get the news they don't want you to hear. And I feel like we're offering a service to get a side of the news that you're not going to hear otherwise. So the way you could be respectful of that and appreciative of that, besides liking and subscribing the One Championship podcast and the Todd Atkins Show, is by when you make your bullshit or your BS YouTube video, which is basically a copy of what Todd said, just say, hey, the first place I heard this was the Todd Atkins Show. And then the next dickhead who watches your video and decides to steal it from you could go, hey, the first place I heard this was the Todd Atkins Show. Now that I've got that out of the way, because we all know that the Bellator news came from one source and it spread out from there, and that's provable. Todd Atkins Show. Just wanted to put that little disclaimer out there, And if not, I'm going to call the FBI and have them come to your house. What was I talking about? Ronda Rousey. Okay, Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey, as I understand it, I'm not the most hardcore wrestling fan, so if I get one or two details wrong, please do not type. I will not read it. Actually, do type because that helps the algorithm. Do it. Ronda Rousey has been fighting or wrestling in the WWE for 5 years. That means that her contract's coming up, just like we discussed. She currently doesn't have a great storyline, as I understand it. My understanding is that there's rumors that she's even petitioning the owners of the WWE to put her and Shayna Baszler in a more interesting storyline. I don't know about you, but when I go to my manager at my terrible job and tell them I think they should be doing more with me, it's generally because I'm not happy. Now, I could go around the world in a tour bus, 365 days out of the year, living in crummy motels, getting my body beat up, wrestling for the most intellectually evolved people in Mobile, Alabama, or I could go and have a one-off MMA event or a couple MMA fights and make million bucks. What would you do if it was you? If you were coming to the end of your physical prime, if you were coming to a spot where you were coming to the end of your physical ability to do such a thing, and then your prospects after that were not great. And keep in mind, because it's the WWE, she could go at the end of her contract, go fight somebody, and then come back and do WWE or AEW or be in movies. Would you say, I'm just going to go back to the thing I've been doing for the last 5 years that I'm not happy with? Or would you say, hey, let's go make $2 million in one night or $1 million in one night or $500,000? That's still a lot of money. And now that Amanda Nunes is gone, who are the top contenders? It's like, I get it. I get it that Holly Holm lost last night, But you got to remember, we have a division that has no champion, that has very few contenders. And those 135ers in the UFC can go up and fight for 145 title. We can have this year Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey in the UFC. So I ask you, for people who say, well, Ariel, someone tweeted that it's not happening. Well, I don't know. I checked my news feed. Someone did tweet that it's not happening, but about 30, 40 other news stories tweeted that it is. There's UFC fighters who are saying it's happening. There's a lot of people in the media who are saying it's happening. You got John Anik, the head commentator for the UFC, saying he could see it. You've got Ronda Rousey in an interview a year ago saying she would come back for certain fighters. And why wouldn't you? That's the question I want to ask. Why would you not make that money? And I'll say this. I'll say this. To think that Ronda Rousey couldn't come back from wrestling because of her last performance in the UFC and beat someone like a Holly Holm or a Misha Tate and sell 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 pay-per-views. I mean, you're crazy if you don't think that's a possibility. And even if she lost, who cares? The pay-per-views are already paid for. But what I think is an even better deal. I mean, is that all tracking? Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm going to pitch something to you.
Let's do it.
When PFL buys Bellator. And keep in mind, Ariel Helwani also said that wasn't going to happen. Now he's come around to the right side of reality, mine. But before he said,
I wasn't trying. I wasn't going to say his name. I wasn't trying to promote a dirty, rotten thief. But okay.
Yeah, but when PFL buys Bellator, the biggest fight for Ronda is Cyborg, who is under contract with Bellator. So to me, if they could say, hey, we'll pay you. I don't know what the UFC contract is. I don't know if she's still under contract with them or how that works. But if they could say, hey, we'll pay you way more to come fight Cyborg, that's a more risky fight. Yeah. You can go fight Holly Holm in a fight no one cares about. People watch it. You're right. It's much safer to fight Misha Tate. But the biggest fight is Cyborg.
Let's assume that she's not on a contract, because I know with the Ali Act, there's certain things where if someone doesn't fight for like a certain number of years, there's exceptions in the contract. I know those UFC contracts are pretty airtight, but Ali Act is like federal law. Don't quote me on that. I haven't read through the thing, but I'm fairly certain that if someone hasn't fought in the UFC for like 5 years, that's why.
But Ali Act doesn't apply to MMA.
I'll do this as a example. 2 years ago, George St. Pierre wanted to compete in Chael Sonnen's grappling tournament, and the UFC blocked him from doing that. He's going to be competing in a grappling tournament later this year. So I don't know if that's
Fight
because
Pass. Fight Pass.
Oh, maybe well, everything's on Fight Pass. I posted my sex tape, and it was on Fight. It ended up on Fight Pass. Everything is. I don't know.
No, it's called the Fight Pass Invitational. So UFC's behind it.
Oh, okay, for sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for making me look stupid in front of all your fans, Todd. Anyways, let's assume she's not going back to the UFC, which I'm assuming that, she fought out her contract. Let's go on that assumption then. There's more than just, and I agree with you, that would do tons of pay-per-views for the PFL. But what about someone who's like not under contract with anybody, like a Gina Carano?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not a crazy idea. No, Gina Carano went from being on one of the biggest television shows in the world to, The Mandalorian, or at least the biggest one on Disney Plus, to doing cowboy movies with Cowboy Cerrone on whatever his name, Dan Shapiro's website, or I don't even know what it is. She's not doing great. It's the point I'm making. And she could come back and make millions too. Why would you not? Why would you not fight another older fighter who's not going to kick your head into the third row and make a ton of money, more than you could? You could probably make that kind of money right now. Gina Carano is a movie star, but it takes like 9 months to a year to film a movie. Why not just go here, work out a little bit, something you probably do anyways, and just make that money, And the thing that it really comes down, by the way, you know who Gina Carano's boyfriend is? He's Superman. He's Henry Cavill. The rumor is that he puts on the Superman suit. Do you think she puts on the character from Deadpool suit when they do it, or is that not appropriate for an MMA conversation?
It's not something
I'm going to go with yes, Todd. I'm going with yes. Anyways, so let's say it's Gina Carano. Maybe some of the newer MMA fans don't know who she is, but you'll definitely get excitement with that. Let's say it's Cyborg. Yeah, you got a better chance of the newer MMA fans that remember her fighting Amanda Nunes, and they know she's like a wrecker. Those are both exciting. There's both something to promote. And that was, and Gina Carano was the fighter that Amanda said a year ago, less than a year ago, she would come back to MMA to fight. You know, this isn't just speculation. There's things out there that point to this being true, and that's one of them. She would. It's easily Googleable, but this is the real thing. This is what it really comes down to. Now, undoubtedly, Francis Ngannou fighting Brock on pay-per-view in a PFL pay-per-view would get more people to sign up to buy a pay-per-view, 50, 60, whatever. It's all going to seem like a deal compared to how much the UFC pay-per-views are now. What if we could do a pay-per-view, a North American pay-per-view that featured Francis Ngannou versus Brock Lesnar, with the co-headline being Ronda Rousey versus Cyborg or Gina Carano or some other free agent who's got a big name that we haven't thought of.
To me, Holm and Tate are kind of like, you know, to me.
But isn't that part of the appeal? If you're Ronda Rousey, like, oh, I'm not going to get my head kicked. And the name recognition. Yes, me and you as hardcore MMA fans, we know that they're not going to make that title run. Miesha has already proven she's not going to make that title run. As much as it disappoints me, I love Miesha Tate. I love her, and Holly Holm too, even though she's a member of QAnon and she thinks there's like tunnels underneath the Senate building and everything. And she's like, protect the kids. You know, either one of those would be great for the casuals because they're like, I know Ronda Rousey. And didn't she like, isn't this the chick she like fought before? That's all it takes for people. All right, let's get the pay-per-view, get a couple people over, pizzas, beer.
Sadly, you know, that's all it takes. Yeah.
That's all it takes. But hey, we're thinking about this like hardcore MMA fans and the most respected journalists in MMA, you know, but it's also helpful to think about this like a business. That's why when I say certain things like she's going to fight soon, people like MMA journalists, they go, no, she's not, because they make 30 grand a year and live in New York and have 8 roommates, even though they're 50. You know, that's why they're thinking like that. They don't have a business mind. And if you think about, if you put yourself in the mindset of someone who is a decision maker at a place like PFL, these things do make sense because you're laying in bed at night going, how do I make the PFL? How do I make the PFL big? Nobody's done it for years. What can I do to make PFL big? There's only a few things out there. There's only a few things you could do. And one of them would be to put on a card with Brock Lesnar headlining and Ronda Rousey co-headlining. And when you look at that and you look at 120, 130, how much have you heard they got from Qatar? Is there a number out there? I heard like 130 million.
I don't know exactly. I mean, I know Dana White said 280.
Oh, okay. Well, shit. I'm lowballing it, I guess. 280 is enough to have Brock fight on pay-per-view 20 times and still have a lot left over to keep the lights on. They're well funded. They can do this. There's nothing holding them back. They have the money. Why would they not? Especially if they want to make it out of this decade. You know, if PFL is going to be around in 2030, they got to make some big moves now. And if they don't, they could forget about making it into, you know, I would even say 5 years. If this Francis thing and this next pay-per-view they do doesn't garner attention, if it's Francis, I know people think it's going to be like Francis Ngannou versus, you know, some heavyweight from who got cut from the UFC 5 years ago. If that happens, the PFL won't even be around 5 years from now, you know? But if this thing is to succeed, they need something like this. So why would they not do it?
Now, I want to ask you about, I want to go to the Chael Sonnen case because I want to hear some, you know, I'm going to.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Please. I want to hear what you have to say first. Go ahead.
All I want to say is this, you know, I don't have a lot to say on this. I don't really cover a lot of news about, you know, guys getting arrested or stuff like that, you know, especially until the case is closed. But I felt pretty comfortable talking about this because the case is closed. As myself, I know you wouldn't think from the appearance that I've had my run in with the law, but I've been on that side. I've had court cases hanging over my head. I know it's shocking. I know I look so like such an upstanding citizen. I could kind of relate to this, but this is an example of someone being charged with something. And, like my listeners, they probably get charged with crimes all the time, Nobody cares because when someone who's normal, who's not worth hundreds of thousands of dollars like Chael Sonnen is, or millions or whatever he's worth, there's no incentive for the victim or someone involved in there to go, oh, actually this happened and I'm going to sue you for $1 million. And I think with any of this stuff, with someone like a Chael Sonnen, a Conor McGregor, especially, he's literally the most famous MMA athlete, one of the most famous athletes in the world. All that, if you believe the accusation, I've got a bridge in San Francisco to sell you because there's so much incentive for there to be misinformation out there. And this is a perfect example of it, This is a perfect example. The guy went from having like 10 felony charges, 20 misdemeanor battery charges, strangulation, all that, to a $750 fine. That's what he ended up with. Nothing on his record, $750 fine. So do you think he strangled somebody? Because I got news for you. I don't care how good your lawyer is. You strangle somebody, you're not getting off with a $750 fine. And the reason I bring that up is not because just to make a point about how people jump to conclusions or believe everything they see in the media. Like, for example, thinking that Ariel was the one who broke the Bellator PFL deal. I can't believe everything you see. But it's more so about the consequences. Because we have a UFC president who's done some things publicly that coincided with the release of the Power Slap League that he saw no repercussions for. And Chael Sonnen, a guy who I know or at least all the stories about him are that he's never drank alcohol, he's never taken drugs, and apparently this story involved him being drunk and fist fighting fans and fist fighting hotel employees. It just seems very coincidental that a guy who's had a squeaky clean record up to this point, a guy that's known as being kind of straight edge besides sticking needles in his ass, to win fights, something I fully support, by the way.
Not entirely squeaky clean. Remember, he got in hot water when he got into real estate.
Yeah, but that was a cool crime. That's a cool crime. That's like embezzlement and money laundering.
Record isn't exactly true. Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't drink. I mean, yeah. So he embezzled a couple $1 million and stole from the government. Like, hey, I lie on my taxes too.
What I want to ask about is, I tried to get the police report for this actually.
Right.
And they denied my FOIA request. Maybe I shouldn't say something. I don't care. Someone said I should look it up. The thing I'm wondering about initially was, his wife had, I guess, some injuries or whatever. I wonder what all happened there, but
I would love to know.
It's not my place to say. I don't know what I can get sued over for saying I don't know all the laws.
I don't think you've said anything you'd get sued over. Come on, if they're gonna take legal action against anybody, it's me. I've got a very suable face. Let's be honest. And I'm not saying that Chael is totally innocent in this. I'm sorry to say it, that if you're walking with your wife and somebody says nice tits and goes honk honk and you punch him in the face, you've still committed a crime. Maybe that was the extent of it. Maybe he was a raging alcoholic who's just done a good job of hiding it and he just fought 20 security guards, all that. The point is that the man, eventually what he was charged with, what matters in the long run, what's going to be on his history record, was a misdemeanor and a $750 fine. So maybe he did do bad, maybe he did nothing, and he's completely a victim in this. My point is this. This man worked on ESPN. He had a really good gig with ESPN. He worked with the UFC, doing commentary, doing their shows. He lost all of that when charged. Now, if that's going to be our policy, our employee handbook in the UFC, there's one guy that doesn't apply to. And that's all I'm saying, that it makes the Dana White situation, which, it's not great. You shouldn't You shouldn't be doing the things that we clearly saw you're guilty of on camera on TMZ. You shouldn't be doing that in the first place. But at the bare minimum, there should be some kind of thing of like, hey, we at ESPN do not align ourselves with the actions of the UFC president Dana White. Now, for us as just dudes, who have normal lives, like that's probably, we don't think about that. It happened. We talked about it. We read the news stories about it, go on with our lives. But what if you were someone who like a woman who spent 5 years of her life in an abusive relationship with a guy who slapped you every day. And then you saw that, you're like, well, I don't like the UFC anymore, And then to have there be a double standard on top of a guy I really like and personally think, is one of the best names in the business, it kind of just rubs me the wrong way. That's the only thing. I'm not saying he's innocent, but I'm saying that there's bigger problems out there, and we're choosing to sweep them under the rug because, hey, the UFC is making a lot of money for ESPN. Who cares? Is
Now,
that fair?
he does have 2 civil cases against him, so he's not in the clear. And in civil suits, you don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So
Right. Look at what
there's going to
happened
be
to
more
OJ.
information come out in those suits.
Hey,
And
let me
probably what
ask you,
came out here.
whatever happened with those class action lawsuits from all those former fighters like John Fitch and all those guys?
I just talked to somebody yesterday about this who's, involved. And he said he's going to, reach out to the lawyer and see kind of where the latest updates are. Mike
Feels
Pierce,
like that's been going on
Pierce
for years.
is one of them that I talked to
Okay.
yesterday, and he's involved in it. He said, you know what, I'm going to reach out and see kind of, because he's like, I haven't heard anything, but it's taking forever, so it's not like he asks every day, where are we at? It's not like that.
Yeah.
But he said, I'm going to check and kind of see what. I'll ask the question.
I think you could do an episode just on that, on Priscilla Cachoeira's contract that came up in Brazilian court. Going into that and for people who don't know what we're talking about, there's 2 class action lawsuits against Dana White, the Fertittas, and the UFC for unfair business practices. And they essentially, if the UFC is found at fault for this, it's going to change the way that UFC contracts and the way an organization like the UFC interacts with its fighters. Is that a pretty fair characterization of the situation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important, but it's been going on for like 10 years. So who knows what's going on with that? Hey, what is up with Kevin Lee? I thought Kevin Lee was going to have a resurgence.
Well, where you want me to answer that? I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to talk to you about it because I heard he had retired, and to my estimation, he was on track to start the best years of his life. He had left the UFC. He had tested the waters in Dagestan or wherever he was fighting. He had found the Muslim faith. He was ready to change his life. And then lo and behold, he's back in the UFC. He's looking great. He's ready to fight a hot and upcoming prospect. And then about 45 seconds in the first round, he's face down, ass up. So I just would like to hear if you thought that this was a real thing, a real comeback or not, or if he was just trying to cash in on that last paycheck.
No, I think his brother's fame, he got pretty popular on like TikTok and whatnot. His brother, Keith, they live in Vegas. I know Keith does. I don't know if Kevin does. I'd assume he does. But, Keith was going around helping he would review these restaurants on TikTok, especially struggling ones. And he was getting more and more popular. So some of these, just by going there and reviewing it, they were getting tons of business, like tons of business. Businesses that didn't have customers before were having people just flood into the door. And I think the UFC said, all right, since if you watch the UFC social media before the fight, Keith was saying, my brother's getting ready to fight. He was in backstage. I don't know if you watched that, but they made sure to get him on. And
sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And I think Kevin, he has to go, he goes there and he kind of trashes the fact that he's fighting at the Apex. The Apex is a big part of UFC's business right now. That's part of their cost cutting and keeping stuff in house. Kind of like what Eric Bischoff did with WCW when he was using the Disney MGM studios. They can do, you go to arena, there's a lot you got to spend on hotel, transportation, the arena itself. You may not have all control over the production. You may have to hire people to come. At Apex, they're in control of everything. They don't have their own hotel yet, but they're in control of everything else, production, everything, the costs of keeping the lights on. So they've cut that down substantially by having all those Apex shows. And he goes in there, and I don't know if he educated himself or what it was, but he was saying, "Oh, COVID's over." That's not why they're doing shows at the Apex. So they were probably like, "You know what, this idiot, if he loses, we'll just, because we didn't need to bring you back."
Yeah, that's a lot of great points and a lot of things I'd like to quickly dive into there. First and foremost, being yeah, for fighters who have that mentality, I would say here's a little known fact is that fights in the Apex are actually broadcast on television. So more than those 100 people in the background are going to be watching. So that's important to know. And also a little known fact, people could watch these fights on like their cell phone, their computer. So it's really a lot of reach there. So that's my advice. Far be it from me to give advice to fighters, but that's my advice to fighters who don't want to fight in the Apex, that it is actually on TV. Yeah, a big failing of myself, and probably the reason that my show isn't as big as yours, is that I'm not actually a social media guy. I literally created my first, not my first, but my first in about 10 years social media account to promote my show. So I don't know about these kind of things, but you saying that makes perfect sense, because I'll throw it back to you on this point. One of the things I think the UFC is so good at, and what gives them a huge step up on the competition, is being able to see when a fighter is about to fall off at the end of their contract and letting them go and letting the competition overspend on them. It's incredible how many fighters they let go and then they lose their first fight. I mean, we saw it in PFL with all those big signings. It's a skill of theirs, and to me, I think they knew Kevin Lee was on the outs. That's why they let him go.
Well, they brought him back because of his brother, no doubt about it. If
Yeah,
you can probably find him on Instagram. I know you're on Instagram. You can probably find his brother. He's hugely popular, and everyone wants him to come to their places, whether it's a small place, big place, no matter what kind of food it is. He'll sit in his car. I just ordered this, whatever, and he'll rate it like 1 to 10, and millions of people watch us.
And for those of you looking for my Instagram content, the_1_FC podcast at Instagram.
Yeah.
Or TikTok. I don't do any dances, but I'm on TikTok too. Yeah, that's the point I'm making. There has to be a reason for Kevin Lee to go, I'm with CCA, Endeavor's biggest competitor. I'm sticking with CCA, and you should make a 165-pound division for me to be the star of. And since you're not, I'm leaving. I'm going to go fight for Khabib Nurmagomedov's organization and become a big superstar over there, because this is the next big thing. Now, fast forward 2 years. Yeah. Fast forward 2 years. He's fought Diego Sanchez. Eagle FC is gone. Khabib has retired from coaching and is completely out of the spotlight. And, he's a man without a home, and the last thing that normally happens to fighters like that is that they are invited back to the UFC. And as happy as I was for him, I was kind of surprised by the decision. I mean, he looked great, but that guy's going to look great till he's 80. He's got abs of steel. So I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. The UFC, are really good decision makers, and they never make a decision with their heart. They always make it with their pocketbook. So that is the only reason I could think of that they would bring him back. They never bring people back for nostalgia. They don't want anything. You could be Anderson Silva, which we saw. You lose a couple fights in a row, you got to go do pro boxing. You're not going to stay here and just keep getting knocked out. They don't do it. Once they've used you, they lose you, One other thing I wanted to bring up, or however many things, I don't know how long you want to talk for if you're tired of being hearing a guy in a multi-colored floral t-shirt yell into a microphone. But one thing I want to talk about was that UFC Apex, and you bring up a good point, and I agree with that. It's like, for me, I'm pretty much the first thing from a fighter. The only thing I ever wrestle with is my sexuality, but that's a conversation for a different kind of podcast. So, the Apex is a unique thing. That thing was designed for like tough and contender series, but the product, although it's not great, it works well enough, and all the business aspects of it that you mentioned, they all make a lot of sense. But my question is this: you got a product like the UFC, a brand like the UFC, they've got billions, they've got the money. And I've driven past the Apex. It's not on the strip. There's nothing but space out there. They built it out there for a reason. And I think I vaguely remember, even in an interview, Dana saying that they have an option on some of the land out there. Why not invest, $2 million and build like 1,500 person stadium right next to the Apex to have these shows? A place like Lumpini that's built, they have just a small space for the cage, and then it's built straight up. It's perfect for fighting. They could rent it out on the time they're not using it for local MMA shows, host the Fight Pass stuff there. Why not do that? It's a small investment, and the product would be so much better. And they don't have to make excuses. Why aren't you coming to Nebraska? Why aren't you coming to Wyoming? Well, because we have the Apex. If you want to come to the entertainment and fight capital of the world and see it in our 1,500 person stadium, and then you could have the fighters be excited. They're still getting the crowd. They're still getting the rush of the crowd. I just don't understand. And then they can make it so that the seats are they're not $10,000 like floor seats are in Vegas at the
It's
T-Mobile
next to
or
the
whatever.
PI, is it not? I've never been to Vegas. Is it close to the PI?
Yeah,
The
it
Apex?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not going to build a stadium. They're going to build a hotel. Why
Hotel
build
would
a
be great
stadium?
too.
Remember, they were doing shows at, what was it, the MGM Grand, right? And what they liked about it was they had the hotel. The guys could walk down from the hotel, do the weigh-in. They had their own arena there. It was all self-contained. You know what I mean? They could do everything on site. When I went to the UFC in Dallas, that hotel was super expensive. The Hyatt, right next to the Freedom. I forgot what the building's called, the Freedom Tower or whatever. But
Yeah.
very expensive. It's like 200 something a night. They had that hotel filled with UFC employees, fighters, corners, Just on the hotel alone, they spent tons. Then they got to go over to American Airlines Arena, pay for that. They probably got to pay some people to do production, pay for that. The cost is, if they build their own on-site living facility, whether it's a hotel or whatever you want to call it, now they're all self-contained. They can run it all there. They got their own training site. They got the Apex. They're totally in control of all the production of the Apex. They don't need to hire anybody. The expenses are low. And when, like I was saying, when Eric Bischoff did this stuff with WC, what was it? He got hired on, just like Endeavor bought the UFC. First thing they want to do is cut costs everywhere they can cut costs. That always happens when you have a merger. WCW wasn't a merger, but Eric Bischoff came in and said, how can I?
Yeah.
Because Ted Turner wanted him to, how can I make it profitable? Well, first I got to cut everything down. That's why he went to Disney MGM Studios. Same thing. They didn't even need to sell tickets. They would just bring, because it was a tour, right? So they bring a new audience in every 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. They'd watch a match or two, then another audience come in. So it was all kind of like easy. And you could do the production look real nice. You have better audio. So UFC is doing the same thing.
I actually think while they're at it, they should build hospitals and grocery stores and childcare centers, and then they could pay their fighters in Dana White's fun bucks. And, then the fighters are completely beholden to them. And even if they have a completely like Estella Nunes, how her arm completely disconnected at the elbow, she would still fight because otherwise she's not going to get any health care. That's the trick. That's what the UFC should be doing in the next step. Todd, you're a genius.
Well, I mean, they don't need to have a any kind of supermarket because they have a cafeteria in the PI. They
That's
can
right.
all eat there for free. So they've got this self-contained entity. All that's missing is a hotel or something. They're not going on the road near as much.
Never, almost never, almost
And
never.
they could sell more tickets on the road, but it's the tickets versus cost. It's they've decided it's not worth it.
The Pearl at the Palms was a dump. If you're an old school MMA fan, you know what I'm talking about. If you're new, you have no idea. But the Pearl at the Palms, it's the Virgin now, which is what a name for people who go to Vegas. Perfect. The Virgin. The Pearl at the Palms was a dump. The lighting was terrible. The seating had these terrible balconies. There was guitars on the wall. It was a dump. And then when they came back to the Virgin for that for the Peter Yan fight, I was like, this is so cool. They should be doing this like once a month. You know that people are I'm not the only one with that people are tired of seeing fights in the Apex, but I'm a degenerate, just like a lot of MMA fans. I know you've heard that term out there. So it's just like, I'll take it. It's not that big of a deal for me. But for me to be excited about the Virgin, the fight at the Virgin, to be like, we should be doing this all the time. I think there is some room there to do something like that, to do a small stadium, something like the Virgin. I think that's probably like 800, 900 seats. That would be cool. But to your point, it's a money decision. You're probably right. They'll probably build a hotel long before they ever build a stadium.
Yeah, because
I will.
that's all they're missing.
I
If they
will say
had their
this.
own hotel, and they could call it the UFC hotel,
Right.
and
And then fanboys will come and stay there. Yeah,
maybe they won't want them there. It
probably
may just
not.
be for fighters, corners,
That would be
reporters,
a
that kind
smart
of
move.
stuff.
I will say this, and this is something I've thought about a lot, and something I've heard rumors of. To me, like going back to what we were talking about with ONE FC and some of these other organizations like Ryzen, that they probably don't have much chance of breaking into Las Vegas, because Las Vegas is the biggest market for fighting, and for to be frank about it, the UFC has a monopoly on it. There's other organizations that can come in and put on events in Vegas, but the UFC has a very tight relationship with the Vegas Commission, and they'll essentially do what the UFC says. So if you're someone like a ONE FC, your dream of hosting an event like they did in Denver in Las Vegas is pretty much nil. They're never going to approve the universal rule set. I will say this, what people have to understand, and if you're not from North America, I'm more saying this for you and maybe for even people in North America, that there's different sets of laws. We have state laws, like, and local laws, like, hey, you can't put this kind of stuff in your front lawn. And then you have state laws that's like, hey, nobody under 21 can drink alcohol. That's like a state law. It's just every state happens to have it. And then there's federal laws, like don't murder people. So when you talk about something like an Indian reservation or a Native American reservation, that is in sovereign land. So for lack of a better term, it's its own country. The only thing
Mhm.
they have to adhere to is federal law, which is above state law.
Right?
So if Las Vegas, with its Las Vegas Nevada State Athletic Commission, says, hey, you have to fight under the new unified rules, if you step foot on a Indian reservation, then you adhere to the rules of that sovereign nation. As long as it doesn't violate a federal law, which it won't, there's no federal laws pertaining to combat sports and MMA, then it doesn't, state laws don't apply. And there is a lot of Indian reservations very close to Las Vegas. And I think what some people don't realize is that there's a couple square miles inside the city of Las Vegas that is sovereign native land. And if I was someone like a Shatri Sityodtong or someone like a Sakyabara, I would say, hey, let's take some of our investment money and invest in a stadium there so we could put on our shows once a month and then host other shows and do some kind of agreement with these tribes so that we could get some of that Vegas money. I guess that's just too far off in the future, or maybe that's too much of a pipe dream. But to me, that would be one way for someone like a Chatri Sityodtong to say, hey, I'm going to do a partnership with this tribe. We're going to host all of our North American based shows. We're going to do 6 shows, 12 shows here a year, and that's going to be our partnership. I mean, am I crazy for thinking that's something that could work? Is that just a pipe dream?
I think you should spearhead it on your show. That way, when it happens, you're behind it happening.
I
I
mean,
live in Oklahoma, so I'm real familiar with what you're
oh
talking about.
yeah. Isn't the entire state of Oklahoma tribal land?
Yeah, they have tons of more casinos here, I think, than any state. And they have a lot of MMA events here of various kinds that all take place on these reservations. You, yeah, I mean, so I get what you're saying. It isn't the best from, they changed the laws. Like, let's say a native person isn't on native land. Let's say they're somewhere in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or wherever, and they kill somebody. Now they got to go to federal court instead of state court just because they're Native American. And federal court, they're gonna get convicted for sure because the feds don't even take you to court unless they're gonna convict you, and you're gonna get the most time you can possibly get. You're gonna serve more of it than you would serve in state court. Yeah, so in that way, it isn't helping them. They changed this McGirt rule. A lot of people are like, oh, they're gonna get off. No, they're gonna get the book thrown at them.
I'll
Yes,
keep that in mind
that
when I'm
hasn't
doing
been
drugs in
ideal
a
for them.
casino till 4 in the morning and I feel like murdering somebody in Oklahoma.
No, I'm saying a native person goes and kills somebody
Oh,
off of native land. They're still going to go to federal court instead of state court.
well, yeah, that's my understanding is that, and if you've never read Tears of the Summer Moon, great read. I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
Rogan promoted it. That's how I first heard about
yeah.
it.
Leo
That's
DiCaprio was here. He's here. I think he was just doing some sort of screening, maybe last week.
the history of the Cheyenne in Oklahoma and Texas is insane, and that's where that term came from. Leaving Oklahoma was going off the
Mhm.
reservation. So when someone does their own thing, that's going off the reservation. But uh, I guess that's neither here nor there. I just have one last question for you. You could ask me more questions if you got it. But Todd, how the hell do I use? How the hell do I watch Ryzen versus Bellator 2?
Oh, I just had
Do
the
I need
guys
a
answer it
satellite
for you.
dish?
The guys told me
Do I need VPN?
it's got to be Fight TV.
Got it. And that's to watch the entire thing from start to finish, or do I have to have Showtime for one and then Fight TV for another? I don't.
When you
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm
when,
just very concerned because it's 2 weeks away and there's nothing on the Ryzen website
when you
in English.
scour our secret chat that you are now a member of,
Woo woo! I'm
you're
in,
gonna
baby.
see that Zach Bousquet, he's a frequent guest on my show.
Yes.
He's from France, but he lives in Japan. He speaks French, Portuguese, English, Japanese.
Great.
He
Great
does,
follow if you speak many languages.
and
Highly recommend.
he does a lot for various promotions in Japan as far as translation goes. Pancrase, Shuto, Ryzen.
Right on.
He's been involved with a lot of things, but he's the one who said it's going to be on Fight, and if anyone would know, it'd be him.
Right
So
on.
when you cruise this Japan MMA beat chat, you're going to be blown away because, like I said, there's about 30 people in there now, and these are all hardcore people, or people that even fought in Pride. Like I said, instance there, Akihiro Gono, a few other guys that trained, a bunch of guys that fought in Pride. Andre Binky, he's a guy who's been on my show quite a few times, and you'll see us talking about all kinds of stuff. Martin DeJong, who founded Glory Kickboxing,
Yeah.
he's in there. So yeah, you
Well,
can ask any questions you want there.
Well, there you go, Mom. My mom watches every episode. Not only was I on the prestigious Todd Atkins show, the guy who originally broke the news about the PFL Bellator deal, but on top of that, I'm on the 30-person Japanese MMA Legacy
Right.
chat. I mean, this is the turning point in my life for sure.
I think it's going to help take the one championship to another
And,
level,
and,
getting
and
this
I
inside information.
and I appreciate that. I want to take this moment just to plug real quick. If you're a fan of MMA and you just are looking for a different kind of content, the same way that Todd offers you really unique, different content, come over to my channel, the One Championship Podcast. We do cover North American MMA. So if you're not familiar with one, maybe you want to learn a little bit more. I cover a lot of North American stuff. As I said, I'm a big North American MMA fan. And then if you are a hardcore one, hey, The only reason I started this podcast is because I Googled one fighting championship podcast, and the results were zero. So there's got to be a voice out there. It's a great product, and I'm just trying to do my part and create a niche that people will enjoy listening to. Plus, we do a lot of comedic stuff and satire, and I do ad reads for MMA products like the Big Francis. XXL Francis Protective Cup and things like that. So it's a good time. And, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do my little plug on here.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I had you on the show because I like what you do, and yeah, so
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
it's only gonna
And
get
hopefully,
bigger, man.
and hopefully this was entertaining for your fans. I hope they realize that a lot of this was satire and they like what I had to say. I think they will. Like I said, my fans are mostly like recent parolees, and your fans are like hardcore educated MMA fans. So I think they'll get the subtlety of satire will be not beyond their scope.
Now tell them one more time where they can find your stuff at.
Yeah, so I'm on YouTube. It's the One Championship podcast, and then on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, it's the_one_ FC_ podcast. If you want to look me up on there, I've got some good stuff on there. And then anywhere you could get podcasts, I have an audio only version of all of my podcasts. So you could find me there as well.
Awesome. All right, so everybody, this is Dave Moore, One Championship Podcast. And for people that support this show, check out his stuff, follow him. And anyone who supports my show, MMA Conspiracy Hour, as always, I appreciate it. And until next time.
Until next time.